Hello, hello, everyone, and a huge thank you for joining us today. This is a Lead Dev online panel discussion created in partnership with Harness. It'll last about 45 minutes. I know we're starting a couple minutes late. That's okay. We'll stay a couple minutes late. It's all good. After which, both myself and the panelists will head over to the Lead Dev Slack to answer any of your leftover questions in the panel Q&A channel. So I'm bopping that up on your screen right now if you are joining us live, because, well, it's not added in our link, so I will add it in a little bit, but I am just really grateful to that community. Yes, it is a way we are talking about in a live conversation, but it is also a way to continue the conversation with engineering leadership like yourselves and Staff Plus engineers talking. It's a very supportive community, so I strongly recommend joining the Lead Dev Slack. So today we're talking about how to govern these things that are acting both on their own behalves and officially on your behalf. How do we govern them? I think that's the question of 2026. It's a much more interesting question. The bottleneck was never writing code. It was always how to get code safely, securely, reliably into production and running in production. But now there's a lot more questions because we're not just governing humans, which frankly, we weren't that great at anyway. So I just want to be clear, we're having a dynamic discussion. We do not have all the magical answers. No one does. If they are, they're lying or they're selling something, or probably both. So you might. So we're all working together to define the best practices today and what good looks like. So those joining us live, thank you. And please do take advantage of the chat, not only to ask your questions, but to share your own experiences. So basically, yes, you joined a Lead Dev webinar where there is homework. So with that in mind, I want to launch a quick poll. I'm going to read out loud for those joining us afterwards, which is, this is our first time using multiple choice in the definition of multiple choice, if you think about it, which is actually you can choose more than one. So where in your process are you using agents right now in your delivery process? This could be DevOps and automation, testing and resilience, security and compliance, cost and optimization, observability. If there's an other as well, please add it in the chat. We'd love to hear that. So we'll let that run for a little bit. Thank you to all of our online participants for that. And yeah, while that goes on, I hope that you will add in the chat, your thoughts, your goals for you have for the day, etc. By the way, I'm Jennifer Riggins. I'm everybody's favorite technology journalist and host. And today I'll be joined by Mitali, Mark, and Pratik. Thank you so much, who are ready to share their experiences and insights. So let's go in that order. Mitali first, if you can introduce yourself and put context for everyone listening.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mitali. I am Director of Engineering at Yelp. I work in the Developer Experience organization. My group is called Backend Platform and does a broad range of things, all the way from observability to testing and build frameworks for our core languages, Python and Java, CI/CD. We also do metrics and insights. And in the last couple of years, AI has also been a big piece of what we are looking at in terms of rolling it out to other developers at Yelp. So lots of very interesting topics today, everything very pertinent to the things that I do at Yelp and my group does at Yelp. Happy to chime in on any of those topics.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And it's one of those times when it's actually a product I use and I have used for a long time. Sometimes we know I'm the least technical in the room of technologists. Mark, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Hey everyone, I'm Mark Boyd. I'm the director at Platformable. So we support the development of open digital ecosystems, and it's good to be here. I use the pronouns he and him. So my background around governance is I do a lot of data. I've done a lot of data governance work in the past. Then that moved into API governance, and now that's moving into AI governance. But in any case, it's always about, as I say, we support the development of open digital ecosystems. And the core unit that makes an open digital ecosystem work is trust. And you only get trust when you have good governance for everyone so that there's a level playing field in which everyone can participate and co-create their own value. And so out of that, that's why governance sort of keeps popping up as being like the engine to make an ecosystem work.
Wow, those are some fighting words. That's quite a statement, but I think none of us can disagree with it, maybe. Thank you so much, Mark. Pratik, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Pratik Mittal. I am a director of product at Harness. Harness is a SDLC platform powering CI, CD, CCM, other different products. I'm currently working as a product manager to implement the core platform, data platform, with the power of governance, compliance, and helping our customers solving these issues.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you all three for joining. And thank you to our listeners for answering the poll. I just want to read the results out loud. So the question is, and you can pick more than one, most probably did, where in your process are you using AI agents? We're focusing on like the delivery process. Yeah, you're almost certainly using it to write code. So that's no longer an interesting use case, and perhaps it never was because it was never the most unique value proposition of the developer anyway. So with that in mind, our results are 83% now of our live listeners now are using AI agents in DevOps and automation. 69% are using in testing and resilience. That's definitely a proven repeatable case testing, so that makes sense. 48% are using it in observability, and just under a third are using AI agents in security, compliance, cost, and optimization. So that is interesting unto itself. We'll see. Please feel free to share in the chat how you are using these things in a more specific way or any questions you have. So Mark, let's kick off with your platformable governance framework. What is AI agent governance versus API governance? Is it all the same anyway?
Sure. No, I think there is a slightly different take on each of those. There's different things that you would focus on. But I think where it's interesting with AI is we are converging actually on the three, and that's around context. And so understanding context and being able to describe the context in just the right level of context as well, is where governance is really then is where governance it really sort of hits the ground. Because if you've described your context properly in terms of, for data governance, that's metadata, and interoperability and use of standards and all of those sorts of things. In API governance, it's documentation and making sure that you've got a good error messaging and that you've got linters that are checking your code is conforming to your style guide and all of those sorts of things. And then in AI governance, it's that you're checking the bias of the AI, you're checking that it's only connecting to the right level of permissions within the company, and that you can trust the solution, trust the results that it's given, and that can be used in the next part of the process. So in all of those, the answer to solve all of those is context. We're getting that more and more. And so so that's where our governance framework ends up sort of blurring across the three. You've got to understand who's using it, how they're using it, what guardrails they need to be in place, the security, the compliance, all of those sorts of things, and the interoperability around a common language.
So you used a lot of tech words, but is governance usually who is usually in charge of governance? Who are we talking about here? And I open that up to everyone, but like interoperability is...
So interoperability is like two systems being able to speak to each other. But who's in charge of that?
Would a business person know that?
Yeah.
So we definitely have a very engineering-based audience, or usually former engineers, now they're directors or managers. But are these all things on the radar of like your compliance team or your governance team, or if that even exists in companies?
Yeah. No, this is great. So I always try to take it a level up for governance, because I think you're right around the people issue and all of that. So before we even get into the context of the governance to ensure that we're aligned with the governance, we want to go up a level and think about 4 things. What is our organizational structure? Because you don't want to be suggesting stuff for governance that's not going to fit your organizational structure. If you're centralized, then you can't suggest that each team do something around governance because it's got to go through the CTO or a governance committee or whatever. But in the reverse, if it is a team-based federated structure, then you need to get each individual team on board and work with them to encourage them to understand the benefits of governance. So your strategies for implementing organizational wide governance will change depending on the type of organization you've got. We know about 30% roughly of organizations are moving to that team topologies type platform and enablement team approach. And so that will be the team that would sort of help encourage global governance and do things like the harness, if that was your tool that you're using for governance across the organization, that platform team's the one that's going to be encouraging that. I'd love to hear more about that. But so that's the organizational structure. Second of all, you need to know who your influencers and the decision makers are. And again, we sort of jump past that. So, and we see this in AI because it's often come out of pilot projects or so on. So everyone's like, don't worry about the governance and the security and the compliance stuff for now. We'll just give everybody super admin rights. Yes, it's in pilot, we're just going to play around with it. And then it's like, great, it works, put it in production. And so there's none of that. So suddenly the governance argument's left out because we're going full steam ahead on that. But so then when someone says we need money for governance to be able to put these systems in place, everyone's like, no, it's fine. It's already in production. And so you've got to think of who are the influencers and the decision makers. Then I'll just finish on these 2 other points. The third one is then you've got to know what's important to those decision makers. So you need to reframe your argument about governance based on what's important. They might be interested in their KPIs. So what are their KPIs? How do you relate governance to be in support of their KPIs? Or you might know a bit of history about what is their passion part of their project, or what's coming up. How is it going to make the large project that they're in charge of, make it work easier? Whatever, those sorts of things. And finally, you've got to be able to describe the impacts of improved governance in terms that they'll understand. So you know that they're interested in the major project, and so you want to be able to talk about how governance and all your metrics around observability, which we saw was really important, but wasn't so great. I think it was about 30% or something in that poll. But imagine if you used AI where you could convert that observability score into a business metric that's going to influence these decision makers. Can you use AI in that way? So you've got the observability metric, but now we're actually framing it in a term that decision maker is going to listen to and be persuaded by. So you've got to. That's the biggest issue I hear from governance implementations, is that people don't have the buy-in to be able to do what they want to do and put the foundations in place.
Yeah, no, and I think that's good, though. I wonder how much transparency across organizations are not happening, because I don't think departments want to tell other people their KPIs. Do they, Pratik?
Sometimes it's in business plans or the business strategy and all of that, so you can go through some of that to find it.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of trust in there, like you said, and I don't know if we'll find the solution to that today, but certainly we'll hope. So Pratik, let's talk about how to build a governance structure within teams. Specifically, we've had a very vibrant chat, and thank you, Bhavdeep, for that especially, but it seems to work in healthcare, which is a highly regulated industry. So how do you end up going about setting up the governance structure within your teams?
Sure. So as we are at the inflection point of agentic revolution, governance is not just going to be set for humans, but I think in this next era, governance has to be set up for AI agents as well. And as one of the person is also talking in the industry, in each industry, the governance will change. There will be regulations, there will be things coming out from government, from industry experts. I think net, if you see the model which Mark was pointing out, I think the 4 areas who the owners will be, but I think when it's about implementation, again, the pieces where you want to do the governance is starting with all the way from authorization and authentication. So, for example, in human world, it's more about like, hey, do I have, uh, authentication to go and access particular resource, particular code, particular library, or in the similar way, the agents are going to be like, hey, do I have any, you can set up those governance for authentication. Similarly, even if you have, we all work in a shared mindset, shared project, shared organizations, right? Like, for example, one of the business leader or one of the engineering person will not have access to everything inside a company, right? So that same application will apply at the agent as well, where you will need access at certain levels, right? Like you may be an admin, you may be just a viewer, so those kind of things. So that's where the agent access control will come into picture. But then afterwards, when Mark was pointing about observability, the industry is moving into a lot of tracing, which is agent traces, where, okay, agent has got access to perform these things, but then if you want to reflect back and understand what has happened, like in the case of there is a OpenAI agents have gone rogue on some of the organization and all, right? Like, but somebody was able to trace it. That's why they were able to find it. So that's where the governance come into picture. It's not just implementing those governance policy, but also able to track it when there is a breach happen. So I would say these are the three top areas. So you start from implementing those policies, but then you keep on observing using observability tools and agent tracing, audit trails to keep observing and then keep building those models where you will be able to find the abnormalities and able to act on it. And that's what I think will be a very important piece in the next agentic revolution.
Can I jump in and ask a question, Pratik, there? So how much resistance are you seeing, or how much convincing? So my take is that, yes, we do need to do what you're saying, but first of all, those leaders need to convince everyone else that that's worth spending the money on, the observability, the, preparing all of those systems. Everyone's just like, no, just get on with it, or like, let's move the that's not the interesting, fun part.
It is, and I think that's where the things will move from demoware to production grade. That's one of the points which we are starting to do, because as and when the stakes are high, when everybody is putting their production code into the production and it's affecting the real businesses, people are really getting serious about it. So I'm already seeing that from maybe like 2 years back when things were like, hey, for me, the most important piece is getting the work done. But now it's about like, hey, I want to do the things in a right way. The same thing I would do in pre-AI era, I am going to do the same thing in an AI era as well, because business can be affected, right? So that's the mode we are seeing, and industry shift we are already seeing that is happening.
Interesting. Thanks.
Okay. So Mitali, we want to hear about, like, in your company, how is this happening in Yelp? What are the changes your teams are experiencing?
Yeah, I think about governance as we want to make sure that we're putting out code that meets the requirements, the product requirements. We want it to be secure, we want it to be reliable, we want it to be performant. And these are not new things, right? This has existed before AI. And the governance is all about making sure it meets all of these standards. What AI has done is we're producing a lot more code. We're trying to move a lot faster. And so it's harder to keep track of whether these things are being met. So in our organization, we're focusing more on what is the observability that we need to build to make sure that we're still putting out code that's doing what it needs to do. And we can collect a lot of observability data, but it's not really feasible to just stare at them at dashboards anymore. So we're going to use AI to try to solve this problem created by AI and see if we can build observability agents. Can we look at our data, our logs, traces at different steps in the deployment pipeline? Can we understand what is happening during the process instead of waiting until production to figure out what's going on? So I think the interesting pieces here for us is like, how do we shift left with observability, bake it into our pipelines, do it during, like right from your IDEs, during testing, during deployments, collect the data that we need. Obviously, we can't collect all of the data because all observability people know that collecting everything and storing everything is very expensive, and there's several vendors that are trying to solve that problem. So we collect the data we need. How do we give the agents the right context, like Mark was saying, the right knowledge, so that it can make decisions on whether we're doing safe deployments? We want to go another step there where we are like automating many of these pieces. Can we get the agents to make decisions on whether we roll back, we move forward based on some SLOs that we track? This is a really hard problem to solve, and the industry hasn't solved it, right? Automated rollbacks. So how do we give it the agents the right context to make sure that we can do a lot of these in an automated way? And I think the next piece is also incident response, right? Once we get to production, how do we get it to manage incidents, monitor systems, do investigations, and guide us in that step of like trying to figure out, okay, an SLO is broken, it's not meeting the performance goals that we have, what's going on? When was the last commit that was committed that in that space that could have caused this problem? Which system do we roll back? These are all kind of hard decisions that need to be made by the agent. And I think the hard problem for us is trying to figure out what is the right context that we can provide and how can it track all of these different systems.
Absolutely. And it's such an important area to do it in because SREs and security engineers were overworked and on burnout track before AI. So double the code and with accountability and traceability, et cetera, I shouldn't laugh because it's one of those you don't laugh, you cry situations we're in, but it is one of those things that were a problem before. So we know about like 31% of our audience was doing that, but I also want to invite the audience to please share in the chat how you are thinking about SREs and incident response with your AI and your platform engineering. Are they different, the same? Do you use agents within your observability platform like other companies we've talked about do? It's very interesting. It feels nascent, but it actually feels one of the most interesting AI use cases and the most urgent. So I really look forward to hearing what people say. So for a lot of this, the logical, maybe this is the world some of us work in, but the logical solution to me is, well, put in a platform. But who should be in a platform, et cetera. So I definitely want to ask the audience another quickie poll of, do you right now have agents running in your IDP? So yes, no, I don't know. No judgment there. It's anonymous anyway. And coming soon, which to me says by 2027. I'll put it as, because we're halfway through the year now. But yeah, so I appreciate everyone explaining that. And then, yeah, so Pratik, because you are a platform organization with an ironic name, because everyone's talking about harnesses now, but that was before this use of the word harness. But how do people use all this with the internal developer platform?
Yeah. So I think going back to what we were thinking about that platform, right? So I think, and I was following chat as well, like some of the folks that are trying to reach upon, like, how do we do at scale? So I would say the principles remain the same, like access control, authorization, auditors, these are like standard pieces which were there before. I think what is going to be very important is how do you provide that identity to an agent? I think that's a problem which everybody is trying to solve. So there are various schools of thoughts where if an agent has to be given an identity, is it going to be the human, or if it's you are doing a chaining of agents, how would you allocate a identity of agent 1 to agent 2? And that's where if even though you set up a governance policy, but if you give more power, that's where the agent can go rogue, and then it can actually go ahead and break out of that governance model. And that's what, from past couple of weeks reports, we are seeing these kind of things are happening. And even with the powerful LLMs like Mythos and others, which we are seeing into the market right now, things can be broken. So in that place, what is more important is you definitely need a not just a platform perspective, but a governance council inside your organization, and then you should be able to work towards that. And then if it's there, then you can actually set up that kind of scenarios, and then implementation will be part of your all these governance levers which you can do. So I think that's the high-level framework which Mark also brought upon, and then Mitali and others are trying to do at leading organization. But that's the overall governance model which can be done to make sure you implement this in the right way.
Okay, fantastic. And just to share the results, because I live and work in the platform engineering bubble a lot of the time. So to me, governance, okay, that's the enablement team's platform makes sense. But just to, as a pie in the sky or part of the pie and the piece for a snapshot of our audience, 60% said they do not have agents running in their IDP. 15% said they don't know. 10% said it's in the works, and just 15% said yes. So I find that interesting. That could be coming down to a lack of trust or looking at it as so important. It could be, again, platform teams have enough going on that they're trying to deal with, that maybe they're protecting that strict golden path or the yellow brick road to production in that way. And I also just wanted to say, because I think what Margarita's comment in the chat is very interesting, risk of losing trust. Someone should take responsibility if they just want to go with the fun part. So yeah, we all have to be responsible, but also how can you do that? But I thought this whole governance council idea was really interesting, Pratik. So Mitali, I was just wondering, like, as we talked about this before, like, what teams do you need buy-in from? So if you are using the platform, or you're building guardrails, or you're setting observability policy, who needs to be involved specifically in the world and speed of AI?
For sure, security. That's an organization that we work really closely with. It was actually just last year that we reorged to have security in the same bigger organization as developer experience.
Ooh.
And that has worked extremely well,
Wow.
right? There's, I think before we've always felt a little bit of that push and pull of like being under different org structures and different VPs and having different kind of incentives. But I think it's been working really well, the partnership with DevEx and security. We have, in fact, weekly things to make sure that we understand that security is looped in really early in the process of any decision making. And I think the security stance has also evolved recently to really understand that we care about the developer experience. It's not just about restricting as many things as possible. How can we enable people to use the things that are needed while they're still being secure? So I think that's worked really well. Of course, we work a lot with legal as well. All of your AI models and how they're trained and how they use your data and store your data is really important to how we operate. I think Yelp, I would say, is probably a bit on the conservative side, and I agree with that. We don't know where this is going. It's better to be safe than sorry. So we have pretty strict like policies that we've already built pre-AI, which we have not changed. We have not adjusted to become more lenient. So legal still plays a big role in deciding which models we use and kind of deciding whether we agree with the values of the organizations that we work with. And I'll also add in finance. We meet with them monthly to really understand how we're using AI, what is our token usage, how are we forecasting how we want to use it. And this is not in a way to restrict people from using AI or increasing token spend or decreasing token spend or creating leaderboards. We definitely don't want to do that. But it's really understanding whether we're getting the value out of AI for the amount that we're spending on it, like what's the ROI, and also understanding that we're using it in an efficient way, right? thousands of dollars a day worth of spend easily, but maybe you're not using it in the best possible way. And we want people who are doing that to kind of share with other people in the organization, like share those learnings and make sure we're just not creating sort of waste. So these are just some of the organizations that we work with, but I think almost every group at the company has kind of similar interactions with these organizations, not just DevX. And really, I think the key, I think Mark was saying that before, and same with Pratik, is like keeping those communication lines open and having those conversations pretty early on and not getting way into the process and you've already made decisions before you kind of add in security or you add in legal as an afterthought.
Wow. Yeah. I wonder how many companies are actually doing this. The idea that security is in the developer experience, I've not actually heard much, though it makes complete and total sense, right? Has anyone else heard this much?
It was put into DevOps some years ago to have DevSecOps, but then that sort of ended up fading out a little bit. So it's really exciting to hear you talk about how security is now aligned in the DevX teams. That's congratulations. That sounds really cool.
That's totally great. We have some questions from the audience. Probably my favorite question in anything, to give bias, sorry, to other question askers. What are the best ways to measure return on investment on AI usage, especially from the point of view of using it in AI-driven development? Which, what is even AI-driven development? It's a word we've all made up, says the journalist that uses these words all the time. Yeah, what are some ways to measure this ROI, especially when we're looking at governance as a key measurement we should be measuring and maybe aren't? Lines of code is not good except for complexity, but continue.
I can jump in on that one. So the two, unless was there anyone that the chat person did want to ask that off? No? Okay, I'll go for it. I think there's two ways that I've seen or that I would encourage. The first is best bets. So when you look at the company or the business organization's annual strategy for the year, business plan for the year, what is it saying is the most important 5 to 7 things it's going to be working on this year? And so then out of that, you're sort of looking at, okay, what are the, is our AI helping us deliver on any of these 5 to 7 bets? Because if it's not, then it's not one of the priority areas that you're working on, working on. And so often it's that whole thing of like the drunk person looking for their keys under the light because that's where the light is rather than where they drop the keys, And so it's that sort of thing of like, instead of just building AI because it's easy, it's like, is it actually meeting with our business purposes? And the second thing, this one's might be left wing for like out of the ballpark for a lot of people, sports metaphor, is the idea of a theory of change. Like, can you map why you think that AI agent or that work is going to produce certain outcomes? So you've got the inputs will be, the cost, the time, what you're working on, the data, all of those things, what actually happens, the activities, then the outcomes, and you're trying to see whether or not that is going to make a change, because sometimes the ROI is indirect. So, in APIs, for example, we talk about reuse of APIs. So it might not say in the business plan reuse of APIs, but it might be saying faster time to market, less developer inefficiencies or whatever. And we can show that reusing an API is going to get you to faster time to market, or is going to reduce inefficiencies and reduce developer time because you're able to reuse assets that you've already got, and then and in the AI context, it's like, can we modernize our API so that it has good documentation and all the rest, so that it is suited for an MCP use case, rather than building an MCP that's not going to work because it's built on an API that's duct taped and paper clipped together because people who knew how to use it, and that the agent doesn't. So, so sometimes you can use that theory of change to sort of see, okay, will this AI agent help us achieve the business outcome, if it's an indirect thing? But yeah, they're the two ways I would suggest you sort of start thinking about ROI.
I can also add a little bit
So
here.
we've got
Yeah.
a specific.
Yeah, so ROI is a hard question to answer, right? There's no straightforward single metric for sure that can explain to you, yes, you have positive ROI. The way we're doing it is, again, an extension of what we had done before. We're still using DORA and SPACE metrics to understand what are the system metrics and how are they changing. It is hard to understand if a specific metric changed positively or negatively because of AI. We're not spending a ton of time documenting every action taken by an agent to see if that resulted in this kind of metric. Maybe in the future, but it's kind of hard right now. But we're still looking at general trends. Is our lead time decreasing? Is our quality staying good? Um, you know, is our change failure rate still reasonable? So those kinds of things. And then on the qualitative side, we have been doing more user interviews just of the teams that are using AI a lot to get them to tell us if they think AI is helping. So this is purely qualitative, them telling us like this used to take us 20 weeks before, and now it feels like it takes us 4 weeks. So this is not very rigorous, but it's a good understanding from the teams that are using AI, whether they feel like they are speeding up some of their workflows and if it's having a good effect. And I think the piece that we're trying to get at right now is like, what's the leverage, right? How much is AI doing for us? How many things are we doing that we didn't do before that we have the capacity to do now? That piece is hard because that requires a lot more granular tracking. And we don't really want to go and instrument every single thing that a developer is doing to try to understand whether we're getting specific actions. But we're trying to figure out a system where we can still get an overall understanding of what's happening. Like we have, how long were these agentic sessions? What are generally the kinds of actions that were taken? Can we get agents to go pick up a ticket and solve them without human intervention? Like, so these are the number of tickets solved or tasks completed, documents written, whatever it is for your organization. What are the things that we can leverage AI for that we couldn't do before? So internally, we created our own framework, which is a mix of various metrics that we've taken from other frameworks. So we picked like 17 different metrics across different pillars, like thinking about velocity or adoption or leverage or quality. Like you choose what is important to your organization, pick at least one metric from each of these so that you have kind of a balanced approach. You're not focusing on moving fast and velocity and sacrificing quality, for example, or you're not focusing on moving really fast and then you're spending a lot of money that you didn't expect to spend. So pick something that makes sense. And I think the most important thing is kind of tracking that over time. We're not going to see really differences week over week or even months. It's generally over several months or years, but have a consistent framework that is balanced across the different metrics and try to understand, is there really trends you can see, and can you start to attribute that to some of the actions taken by AI?
That sounds awesome. That's what I mean by that sort of theory of change, where you've got the metrics and you understand. Do you have like a narrative on why you think each of those metrics will influence the ROI? Yeah.
Yes, and we have a formula that we came up with.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is forecasting, but it's like this is developer hours saved. What does that translate into dollars, and why do we think this is positive ROI?
Yeah, so that's what I mean by theory of change. So that's fantastic. Yeah, that's what I think every organization needs to do, is sort of sit down and take a step back and map that sort of thing out.
With that in mind, is that because every organization will have it different then? Like governance is so unique to an organization. Nobody wants to hear that because they want easy fix, but nobody's moved to the cloud either, or DevOps. So
I think there's probably similarities. I mean, it sounds like Mitali's drawn on existing metrics like that. You mentioned DORA, a few others. So, there probably is going to be a baseline, out of that 17 that you're tracking, Mitali, maybe like 12 would be relevant to most organizations, and some because of their business plan or the priorities for this year might have slightly different ones or whatever, So I think it's it's not going to be completely different for every single organization, but I think but there will be some of those tweaks, I think. But every organization needs to understand the assumptions and why they think that's, important. Otherwise, with AI, you get really off track quickly because it looks like magic and you go down those avenues and you don't even realize it's not solving the stuff that actually that's part of your core business.
Yeah, and then on those points, right, I think two tactical items I feel everybody can do is one is we can always measure what is the AI assisted PRs in the dev world. So there is a manual PR, the manual way, and then you can always come up with AI assisted PRs. That's one. Another tracking you can always do is you can track AI generated code from prompt to production. So which means from prototyping to production. So and both of these should go up as you mature as an org.
Okay, absolutely. And just thank you for that. Hopefully, but we're finding we can go a whole other day about data because even the AI impact report coming out of Lead Dev later on this month is what I've seen so far. Some of it's quite shocking. We'll talk about that in another conversation. But just one last audience question that Margarita, I think is a really good question to wrap it up, but also maybe is frustrating a lot of people. What are the best ways to learn about the governance and what should be used as a source of best practices and information or inspiration? Or are we all just trying our own things while figuring it out? And I think both can be true is part of the answer. So what are some best ways that people should be learning about governance? I would suggest ask the people within your company, because your company may not seem to care, but there are individuals and leaders of their departments that care. So maybe you're the one that creates that governance panel, would be my idea. Let's popcorn some other ideas of how people can learn both about their unique governance and just what other companies are doing. Please share it.
So maybe one thing, again, tactical would be policies. So I know it's very hard to come up with cookie cutter, very generic policies, but then as a policy engine, as Mithali was talking about, like security is part of the engineering org. So I'm very sure their policies are very different. If legal has some policies, that will be different. If finance has some policies, like for example, like, hey, you can only use that much money on AI or tokens, then they have a policy. So I feel like in future, more and more set of BUs or business leaders will start setting up these policies at a granular level, and then each and every org will have a different set of policies they would like to set. So I would say some kind of an open policy engine implementation we all can do, where instead of very generic high-level policies, everybody can contribute with their own specific set of policies, and through which you can have very curated governance, which works best for you instead of following very standard models. So that's one approach which can be taken.
Okay.
No, thank you very much for that. Mark, you had some thoughts?
I do. I've got a quick six. Can I mention six very quickly? So think about authorization. Pratik's talked about this quite a bit already, but like just enough authorization or just enough permission, should be the rule of thumb you're using around this, rather than give it super admin rights, that sort of thing. Cost, and I loved what Mithali was saying earlier about aligning Yelp's values with the AI. So it's not just cost as in FinOps costs, but environmental costs, and also the cost to your reputation if your use of the AI agents is unaligned or out of alignment with your values, your business values and your purposes and that sort of thing. So having something around that. Consent, have you got consent around the training data that you're using, around, if the agents are public facing, like are they, are we clear, around that whole and now in the EU with the AI Act, we've got requirements around labeling and that sort of thing. So coming back to that labeling, the bias and guardrails look into those sorts of things. Guardrails, I mean, in particular around making sure that at each stage that the agent's making a decision, that it's not, if it makes the wrong decision, that there's some observability or some governance over that, rather than it just taking the wrong decision and going further. So you end up like with a really skewed result because it's taken one wrong move but kept using that thing. And then the outcomes. So looking at what the outcomes are, much like we've heard around with the ROI stuff. So being able to look at that, is it really giving us the value in the areas that are important? So I'd say those 6 areas, but also don't, one of the things just recently, I was working on something around AI governance for small and medium enterprises, and the Canadian government's AI suggestions or AI advice for government departments is a really good, if you change that to industry, it's a really good sort of checklist of things that you could sort of start thinking about as your governance model without getting too overloaded with. To me, I love the European stuff, but it's very detailed and very bureaucratic. Something like the Canadian one, have a look at it. It's really simple to think about, how would I apply this in my organization?
Okay, thank you, Mark. Mitali, what would you add?
Yeah, I'll just sort of combine what Pratik and Mark have been saying and kind of what we've done at Yelp. I highly recommend a use of AI policy at the company level, right? Figure out what makes sense, because if you don't, people have questions and they're either like not asking them and doing things that you don't want them to, or they're just really afraid to use it and they don't. So having that written down and published is really important. And then you can kind of break that down into, and we've done this for different departments. This is the general policy. What are additional things that you would add? Engineering might have something different. And then also combining what Jennifer said, the people at your organization have already been doing this, right? They have been thinking about this, and this is something that existed before AI. So your policies should not be something wild that you've come up with just for the sake of AI, but it should be aligned to your values that have already existed. And you really just have to take that and kind of extend that out to, what does that mean for AI? And then I think the last thing I'll say is there's tons of great research, lots of really good researchers in developer experience and the platform world who have been thinking about this. And you don't have to start from scratch. Like even the metrics that we came up with, we're taking inspiration from these different frameworks and building something that works for you. There won't be a cookie cutter thing. Your organization will want different things, but that doesn't mean that there isn't already research stuff out there that you can just take and tweak and try to figure out how it makes sense for you and adapt that. But it's better to do that than have nothing and then have to go back and create that policy later. So I highly recommend, even if it's not perfect, start somewhere, start putting a policy together, and make sure it's well understood by everyone at the company. Like publish it, talk about it, and all staff, that kind of thing. Like make sure it's in front of people's eyes.
Okay, thank you all so much. I think it's very clear we're all early on our journey. Nobody's Google, and even they're still working it out, I'm sure. So sharing is caring. It's more than ever, we should be sharing what we're learning, our best practices. And if nowhere else, you can do it in the safe space that is the Lead Dev Slack, where we're going to move over our chat. If you have any other questions in the panel Q&A. Thank you three so much. And thank you so much to our very active audience. Good luck, y'all, with governance and everything else. Bye.